Morning, everyone. Welcome to, I think this is like the 15th or 16th webinar that we've presented. A new departure for us, and one that will is wonderful and delightful for us in that, and for you as well, because it's not just me spouting my brain at you. Joined this morning by three very distinguished and experienced hospice fundraisers, who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves in a second. So I'm Ash, I'm the founder and creative director at Pebble Beach Fundraising, and we work extensively throughout the hospice movement. We've been working on Light Up Life campaigns for 15 years now, and I've seen a lot of different experiences. But rather than us just telling you what we know, I really felt it would be more instructive to have some views from the movement and yourselves as well. So what we want to do is to get some views from John, Veronica and Hayley, but also ask you to make your own contributions. So where there's a question you have to ask, where there's a point that you want to make, an experience, a really positive experience that you'd like to share, we'd like to have that. We'd like everyone participating today to go away, hopefully, with at least 3 new ideas from experience elsewhere that they can go and implement for themselves. Okay, so guys, if I could kindly ask you to introduce yourself. So Veronica, who are you, please?
I'm Veronica. I'm the head of fundraising and lottery now for St Barnabas Hospice, and I've been here for nearly 10 years. So I've seen all manner of different changes over those times. So I head up the team here, so looking after all the fundraising and lottery.
Thank you. Hayley, hello.
Hello, so I'm Hayley Brown. I'm the individual giving manager at Eleanor. We're a hospice based down in Kent. I've been with Eleanor 7 years now, but doing IG for the last 4. So
wonderful, thank you. And good morning, John.
Hi, Ash. I'm John Brady. I'm head of fundraising, which includes lottery and shops at St Andrew's Hospice. We are the one in Scotland, not the one in Grimsby.
Okay. It sounds like that. Is that on your badge when you walk around? We're the one in Scotland, not the one in Grimsby.
Well, I say that we've had a few things in recently, kind of Stop My Lottery, and they were in Grimsby, so we had to say,
Hi,
well,
I've just gone into that webinar.
We pass it on.
Everyone participating, if you kindly mute yourselves when you come in, please, I'd be very grateful. Thank you. So what we're going to do is, here's what we're going to talk about. Firstly, sorry, GDPR, don't we all love it? This webinar is being recorded. We'll edit this down and we'll make it available. It'll go on our website, it'll go on YouTube as well. And Veronica and John are also trustees of the Hospice Income Generation Network. And again, that if that will be available through the Hagen website if they wish to take that. But again, here's the information you need to know about recording. And if you'd like us to make any changes or remove that, then you can let us know. Here's what we're going to be covering today. So we're talking about Light Up Life. And what we wanted to do is just to review the learnings and successes that the movement had in 2020, and what does that mean for 2021? How do we apply that knowledge and experience for 2021? So we'll be looking at the 5 key elements of fundraising that we always focus on, and that's audience first. What do we know about people? Who are we speaking to, and what do we know about them, and how does that change our decision? What is our proposition? And I want to break that down into both the proposition for the event and the participation in Lights itself, but also the fundraising aspect of that. What is our fundraising proposition this year for Lights? How should we communicate? What are the different channels that we can choose, and what's the experience that we've got from last year? Briefly, just touch on timescales. When does this happen? When does it work best? And I'm interested in looking at how that affects other things in the 3rd quarter of the year as well. And finally, what's the message? What's the creative? How do we show? How do we inspire? How do we engage? Okay. And what I'd like to suggest is for each of these elements, so if we talk about audience first, for each of these elements, I'd like to, our team, so Lucy and our team will be collating questions. So if you've got a point you'd like to make or a question that you'd like to ask of us lot, that's absolutely great about audience or proposition. Please pop those in the chat function in Zoom. Lucy will pick those up, and before we move on to the next section, we'll just check if there's anything that we need to cover that we haven't talked about. Okay. So firstly, on the selection of audience, what do we do this year about our warm selection? So one of the challenges that we always have for Lights, and every hospice, is who do we go to, and who do we send this out to? And we know from our experience that there are some hospices where Lights is literally everybody gets it, and there are some hospices where only a very, very, very small percentage of the audience of the existing supporter base receives lights. That's largely people who've done lights before. And the challenge, of course, is how do we find that sweet spot where we're asking as many people as possible to engage who are also likely to respond and to give money to us. So can I ask, so V, if I can pick on you to start with, so what's been the experience last year? So last year we talked about an expanding lights and lights being something that was offered to a wider audience. Yeah. How was that? How did that work for you?
It worked quite well because we went from usually our core mailing over the last few years has been about 4,000 that we'd mail out to, which is obviously existing like lifers, but also anybody that's donated to certain in-mem appeals. But we've been over the years been widening that audience. So we did have 16 different segments last year. But 2020 we also managed to get 7,000 new supporters on our database. Some of that would have been through lottery and raffle because we did something slightly different last year. Yeah. And some of our shops, gift aiders came on board as supporters as well. So there was a bit of a mixed bag along with obviously the other activities that we did. Okay. But yeah, so our audience, we doubled our audience, but we more than doubled our income, which is great. But in terms of the actual responses, we had about 1,500 responses, whereas the previous year we'd had less than 1,000. So quite a good uplift for us, but obviously we'd love to get that even bigger going forward.
And was it possible to identify where those extra 500 odd responses came from? So the last 18 months, I think hospices across the UK have had a lot of success in bringing in new supporters. Obviously, it's local nurses looking after local people during a pandemic. You know, the response was strong, and then lights is one of the fundraising options we have. So are we seeing shop gift aiders? Are we seeing new lottery players? Are we seeing new IMOs? Is there a particular type of audience you say, aha, these are the guys that are coming into lights for fresh?
Not as yet. We need to do a bit further analysis on that, if I'm honest, because I think it's such a mixed. I think some of it is the fundraising activity. Yeah. People just wanted to do something different, and obviously everyone's stuck at home. So we have got quite a few new supporters that way, but they were doing fundraising activity in memory, so technically are an in-memory supporter, but they weren't on our database prior to that. So yeah, it's
John, your experience of last year. So obviously your service went completely online last year, so the proposition was different.
Yeah.
How was that, again, in terms of audience? Because one of the conversations I remember we had last year is about that lights in 2020, because of the experience we're all going through, is an opportunity to offer that engagement to an audience beyond the hospice walls. You know, you don't just have to have someone cared for here.
Yeah, we probably had a mixed bag. If in contrast to V, we ended up mailing less people than the year before, partly because of changes in data preferences. Because of furlough, we weren't able, and people leaving and furlough and a whole mixture, we weren't able to tap into things we wanted to do, like shops, gift aiders, or narrowly define the lottery. So we ended up mailing less people, but our whole service certainly did go wider, because Lanarkshire's a huge geographical area, and certainly from anecdotal feedback, we know that people who traditionally wouldn't come up to the hospice, because it's, you know, if you South Lanarkshire's, you know, about 100 miles, very rural, but those people were able to take part in the service at home, and digitally we got a lot more gifts, both in responding, whether it was off the back of Facebook or websites. We did far more digitally to go wider, at the same time as having a narrower database, if that makes sense.
And so the income improved as well, didn't it? Obviously,
massively.
Yeah,
massively.
Hayley, so your experience. So Eleanor is a joint service, so it's adults and children's hospice service. So what role does Lights play in Eleanor's calendar?
So Lights does tend to still have an adult focus, but case studies that we use actually cover the spectrum of services that we have for both adults and children. So the family that very kindly spoke for us last year were using adults and then children bereavement services. Yeah. So we were able to link it in that way. We do find it a little bit of a struggle trying to bring in the children's side, naturally, because you don't have as many children die, which is fantastic, over the course of the year compared to the adult side.
Yeah.
But we still obviously try to incorporate that, and particularly in the service as well. So either then to have a child reading or to put something together from the children's team to actually then promote that service at the same time.
Yeah.
We used to run our Lights of Love in our autumn newsletter. And for the last 2 years, we actually separated it out and did a solus mailing. And over the last 3, so we've actually decreased our mailing numbers by 2/3. So last year we only sent 8,000. But we increased our average donations and our response rates by then doing that. So our average donations went up to £38 a donation compared to £29 the year before. And the costs behind it were obviously significantly lower.
Yeah. And that's important, isn't it? So we'll talk about proposition, because I'd like to cover about what are we actually asking for here, and what's engagement options, and how do we ask for money. Do you feel that was there evidence last year that, again, Lights as a service, as a product, is something that can be offered to a wider audience within the family, as it were? Was there more resonance of Lights last year?
Yeah, I think we struggle with having people on site just for restrictions with numbers, and obviously last year forced us to do an online service, and that was the best thing that we could have done, because it did open it up to additional people. Families were able to then watch it, not together, but at the same time, and be able to then, and we had a lot more people view our online service than what we would have had attend the service at the hospice. And it's still live, and I think that's the nice thing as well. People can still view it now if they want to.
And I think that's the interesting challenge, isn't it? I remember back in the day when I was working with St Barnabas, one of the challenges was we had a room that held 900 people, and 900 people turned up for Lights every year. And so we gambled on holding 2 services in the same day, in the same room for the first time. And 500 people turned up to the afternoon. And then we all kind of held our breath to see what was happening in the evening. And in the evening, 900 people turned up. So by offering more engagement, by thinking about our audience, older, these services tend to be held in the dark, in the cold, outside quite often. Not many seats available. So one of the options is about giving people different opportunities to engage, allows more people to take part. But also, if we only ever offer Lights to an audience that have already told us they're interested in Lights, we're already narrowing our appeal. And V, what you were saying about 7,000 people, new people joining the database. Well, if they've never had that opportunity, if they've never seen it before, if they've never had the chance to engage with Lights and to take part in it, how are we ever going to bring people in? So I think there is an opportunity. My feel, certainly for 2021, is that with the warm audience, with those people we already have relationships with, we need to think carefully about who we choose. Yes, those people have demonstrated Lights affinity before, but this is almost a unique opportunity to reach out beyond those and say, guys, this is actually something really warm, uplifting, positive that we could do.
And I think the difference for us, because we've done 2 ironwork in memory appeals.
Yes.
My assumption, along with the rest of the team, was the assumption is it's in memory. They would translate to Lights, and actually it was very mixed in terms of, it was a lower response rate than we expected from that segment of people.
Yeah.
And I think that shows people want that tangible in memory product rather than that symbolic Lights. So again, we'll be treating those audiences slightly different this year.
Your Ironworks campaigns, just so those are people who contribute, and there is a physical thing. I think you've done flowers and dragonflies, have you not? Where there is a display in the name of each loved one, you take them away.
Yeah. So, and that, like my assumption was, okay, they've done that. It's in memory. They would automatically translate to be like a lifers, and actually not necessarily. So. Do
you guys also, do you feel, obviously I'm not looking for individuals, but do you feel, are there people in your database for whom Lights is the thing, that's their participation, that's their engagement point, and they're not really engaging anything else? Is that reasonable?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we've got a data segment, because you come across it, and with the dreaded GDPR, so we had people that stopped getting mail and then contact us, and so they've now gone on. We've got a specific preference for Light Up a Life only, because they don't want to get magazines, they don't want other appeals, but they most definitely want to get Light Up a Life. So some of them are self-identifying. There's definitely a core audience.
So as a cynical direct marketer, my view would be, where people have self-identified that the thing I'm most passionate about and most interested in, Light Up a Life, I'd like to be reaching out to those people and making sure that we give them that focus. So let's make sure that their Light Up Alive experience is as rich and engaging as we possibly can. And we can talk about, you know, the event participation as well. Can I just move on to on audience? We talked about warm audience, right? How do we think about the people that we already know, people that are part of our hospice family? What about the rest of our community? What about those guys outside the walls? Was there any experience last year of recruitment of new supporters through Lights? John, you mentioned, you know, Facebook, for example. Did you see evidence of people coming into Lights as their first engagement last year? And do we think that this is an opportunity this year for Lights to be pushed out beyond the hospice walls to try and engage a wider audience?
It's, I mean, I have to admit shame to direct marketing audience that I can't pin. We've just not had the time with COVID and furlough to properly identify and quantify the number. But definitely we did stuff in the local newspaper that we don't normally do. We had Facebook, we had a dedicated page, we had a lot more social media going on that and we were getting more and more donations. So but sure. I can't put my hand in heart and quantify it. I'd love to be able to do it, but we'll keep that activity going for 21.
I think that's just Hayley, I'll come to you in a second. I just want to ask about your experience, but I think that's a really important point, that one of the things we can all really valuably do, as hopefully, touch wood, you know, we settle back into, you know, somewhat normal lives, certainly in beginning of 2022, we must look back and review and analyze and understand what happened, who engaged with us, who spoke to us, where did they come from, what were the channels they arrived through, because it's going to affect the way that we want to speak to them in the future. And that review and understanding of audience, I think, is absolutely crucial for all of us to be able to understand who do we talk about for Lights, for regular giving, for legacy, etc., as we move forward. Hayley, what was your experience in terms of, was Lights a chance to reach out again and talk to the whole community? Was that a doorway you could open?
We did in respects of press releases and advertisement around the local area, but we didn't go to town. We also run a Christmas appeal, and that did have that behind it instead. Okay. We tried to then concentrate Lights of Love around the but as you say, like, we've got so many supporters that then join us, or they're on the periphery, they've sponsored somebody, but actually is it their involvement that we need to look at? So they might not be in our warmest of segments, but they absolutely should then be approached, because it might just be the right time, and just because they didn't do it last year doesn't mean that they won't do it again. They wouldn't do it this year. It's
a good shout. I really think so. In normal times, we'd be quite happy saying, okay, if we'd offered someone, I would always want to make sure that everyone's been offered Lights at least once, because if we never offer it to them, how do we know if they're interested or not? But it would be reasonable to say that if we'd offered Lights to someone twice, let's say, and they haven't engaged, well, maybe we won't spend money, you know, trying a third time. But in this situation, with this level of this change of experience, human experience we've all been through, we've no idea how many families and how many members of the community we're speaking to will have been affected by COVID, will have experienced loss, will have experienced isolation, etc. So that opportunity to come together to be part of a congregation with a small c that is sharing memories and experiences, that might just be a doorway that people want to walk through this year, where they hadn't thought about it last year. So again, I'm keen, within reasonable budget limitations, obviously, in trying to make sure that Lights is a doorway we open to as many people as possible this year. And I think, you know, there is evidence, certainly from last year, that if we get out there and we shout about the fact that Lights is something that the hospice provides for the entire community, irrespective of whether you've been cared for by the hospice or whether you've got a loved one that has, then this is something you can take part. And the digital, as we'll talk about in a second, the digital engagement options are really important for that, I think. Lucy, at this stage, any questions that have come in, Lucy, about that we need to think about? Has anyone suggested anything?
Yeah, there's one audience question in the chat. How and if do you include your most recently bereaved families? Do you have access to this data from your bereavement teams, and how do you sort of handle the messaging and the ask? Do you separate them? Do you keep them together?
Okay, excellent question. Absolutely right. Does anyone of you three want to jump in on that? Who's got experience in that? Okay, V, do you want to start off and then Hayley to jump in? Is that okay?
Yeah. So for the last couple of years, we have incorporated our recently bereaved. So our bereavement team have been receptive to this. Previous to that, there weren't so much. So we've been able to write to those recently bereaved in the last 12 months. Not so much that there's been an ask on there, but it was very soft because that was the only way we could get it through. But almost saying we were dedicating a light for their loved one, and to see if they might then make a donation on the back of that, but also to include them in the actual digital service last year, or the previous actual event. But take up was actually quite a lot lower than we expected. So again, it's some of the messaging we probably need to look at for this year.
Okay, thanks. Hayley, what was your experience?
Yeah, so we've got a really great relationship with our wellbeing team, and again, so it's similar to Veronica, that we work with them and send a letter out to then all of our bereaved families, but we target it more around inviting them to the service itself, and then include a star. So we have stars go out in our pack, and then we ask people to send them back. So, and then we do the same, and then it's all in there about the website, so everyone can then sign up. And then we did get some donations come in on the back of it, but as we say, I think our bereaved families work with patients that have only just lost a family member, so it's still really, really raw. And sometimes in the first year it isn't quite the right approach for them, but actually we're looking at then our second year, so to then see if it might be the right position for this year for people who lost people last year instead.
With you. No, I mean, it's a really thorny part, and our experience, I think, has been wide and varied in this, in that some hospices, lights is a bereavement services thing, and fundraising are allowed to chip in at the last moment. Elsewhere, it is completely a fundraising thing, and fundraising completely dominate and make all the choices about data selection, including next of kin and recently bereaved. And it's about culture and history and habit, I think, that defines those. Where my own comfort zone is, as the ward sister at St Barnabas famously said to me 15 years ago, just because you're dying doesn't mean you turn into a blithering idiot. And I say that often for those of you who've seen these webinars before, and it's absolutely true. So some of the challenges are about how do we offer lights to recently bereaved in an appropriate and suitable way. Often our response, Hayley, as you rightly say, is there's two things on lights. There's here's the thing, here's the engagement opportunity about remembrance and celebration, the light on the tree, etc. Oh, and then there's fundraising. So we just take the fundraising bit out. So we have so we will create a version of the again, you can see the kind of materials on the screen here. We'll create a version of those materials that simply talks about this is when it is, this is where it is, this is how you engage, this is where the parking is, and all that kind of stuff. There's no response form in there, and there's a different letter that takes out all the financial ask, and we give that to the bereavement services team, and then they can do as they wish with it. You know, they can engage with that. I know that there's often challenges around data and GDPR, and the fact that, hang on, this is held on a different database and there, and therefore, so there is under GDPR some challenges now about do we have permissions, but a fundraising communication to someone who's next of kin, a direct fundraising communication, might not be fully adhering to GDPR, but offering a service, offering our bereavement support service to someone who's recently lost is completely part of the hospice output service, and therefore would be completely covered by GDPR purposes. People can then opt in if they wish to fundraising, that would put them on the fundraising database. So there are ways of doing that. The one word of caution I'd give, and this has happened, forgive me if you were on the webinar last year, I told this story, but something I will never forget. I was in one of our clients many years ago, a dozen or so years ago, and an old boy who they knew very well came in to hand in his latest bit of fundraising. And as he was in the fundraising office, he broke down in tears. And it turned out his sister had died at the hospice 20 years previously. And he had fundraised for the hospice for 20 years. And he had attended Light Up Alive every single year since then. And it was one of these, it was a lights where it was limited numbers, and therefore you had to reply early, first come, first served, to get a ticket to come in, otherwise you couldn't come. Yeah. In the August of that year, his wife had died at the hospice. He was then flagged as recently bereaved, and therefore was not sent the Light Up Alive pack, because that's a fundraising pack. So the Light Up Alive service he most wanted to attend after 21 years of knowing the hospice, he was not invited to, because a flag suddenly was raised. They said, oh no, we can't send a fundraising pack to this guy. He was already there. So we've got to be intelligent about the way we use data. I am entirely comfortable in saying that we shouldn't just be chucking a big, strong fundraising message in front of someone who's recently bereaved. Of course we shouldn't. But someone who already has a multi-year, rich, deep relationship with the hospice, who then becomes recently bereaved, we have to treat them as an adult. We have to treat them as a human being capable of making an informed decision. And so therefore we need to think carefully about that. And if there are some challenges around how we manage data, then again, we can offer at Pebble Beach here some experience from elsewhere that would hopefully solve that problem. Hopefully that answers that particular point. I'm going to move on to proposition now. And by proposition, I want to talk about two things really. What are we offering as a proposition in terms of the event, in terms of the experience, of participation? And then I'd like to move on to the fundraising, because I'm a cynical, hard-hearted fundraiser and I want the money. So I'd like to make sure we cover that. So the event, can we just briefly, would you guys mind? So Hayley, if I pick on you first this time, please. So what's the decision for 2021? Are you going in person? Are you going digital? What's the flavour going to be this year?
We're doing both.
Okay.
So we learnt a lot from last year and previous years doing our actual services themselves. A bit like one of the others that you mentioned earlier. So we'd gone to then running 2 services on the same day because of numbers. But this year we're then going to have 1 service that will be a bookable event, and so that we can control numbers, and we're then going to film that service, and then we're then going to put it out digitally the following weekend. Okay. So is that then we can open it up to everyone, and anyone who then registers interest for the digital will be sent an at-home pack. So then they'll have their order of service and a candle in there as well. Brilliant,
thank you. John, what's happening to numbers this year?
We're aiming for a service, and we're also aiming for live stream. I say aiming because we're doing a summer event for the first time, Thanksgiving Thistles, and we're aiming to live stream that. And depending on the experience of live, and taking on board what Hayley said, it might be that we end up doing digitally after the fact and not at the time. But certainly at this stage, we're aiming to go out live as well as the actual service.
Okay, thanks, John. V, what's happening at St Barnabas?
Very similar. We're going to do a hybrid approach. Our digital, we usually do 9 services. So last year was almost a breath of fresh air to only do 1, and it was pre-recorded, which then went out live. And because we also have a torchlight procession, which is a physical event with over 1,000 flaming torches walking through the streets of Lincoln. So we kind of want to bring that back, and that will be our focus as the actual event. But we're going to do our pre-record in September, which will then air on the same night. So everybody at the torchlight procession can view it on a big screen, and everyone can be involved at home as well at the same time if they can't make it to the actual event. Then we always have a smaller service outside the cathedral once the Tree of Life is lit after the session.
Okay, and with it, I mean, interesting that again, so a blended approach from all three of you, keeping digital, keeping in person there. Hayley, I know that your event is going to be indoors, and that's one of the reasons why you're looking to limit numbers. There's a challenge there about who gets to go. What's the pecking order? Is there going to be priority given to recently bereaved, for example? You know, it's one of the questions I think that needs to be thought about is, okay, actually, who, if we could choose, who are the 200 people, or is it just be, you know, a wide open and first come, first served, etc. I know from, you know, when we had people requesting numbers years ago, one person came in and said, yeah, there'll be 16 of us coming this year, and we're like, right, fine, you know. So is there a thought about how you might control numbers? Have you been able to work that out with your colleagues yet?
Yeah, so it keeps going backwards and forwards at the moment, but we will be reserving a selection for the bereaved families. So if we think it's probably going to be 300 is our max, so we will then keep 20% of those back. So we will only then offer up the first lot on a first come first serve basis. But it will be kind of prominent in the mailing pack so that people can actually see, and then how then they can then obviously book into the service itself. It doesn't mean they've got to do 2 actions. We want them to send back their dedications and then book into the service, but it will help us. And I think people's mentality's changed over the last 18 months. They understand that they need to book ahead and plan ahead a bit more as well. Yeah.
John, yours potential service is outside.
It's outdoors.
And so bigger numbers, yeah.
We've got the big car park. Again, we're planning because of what we're told. COVID will be at Christmas time. but there's just that thing at the back of our mind that it might be we can't put it on, but hopefully we're not in that world. But it's certainly at the back of the mind. But last year, I suppose COVID was a game changer, because for years and years we said, could we not record this? Could we get it up online? And for 101 reasons you couldn't do it. Along comes a pandemic, and everyone's like, let's get the cameras out. So if grasping at straws to get a positive thing out of COVID, but that's definitely one. I don't think we'll ever go back the way on that one.
I think you're absolutely right. But also, John, as you said, Lanarkshire's a big geographical area.
Yeah. So
for those living in Airdrie, it might be easy to pop round. But actually, if you're 30 miles away and if it's been, snowing, there's no way you're going to be able to get there in person.
Absolutely.
So having that remote engagement opportunity. You might have, some of you who've seen other webinars might have heard this before, but we're working with Worcester Cathedral, and who are fabulous to work with, but they've never really engaged in fundraising before, and they had to change their services. So this is a cathedral, and on a Monday morning, they would normally have 6 or 7 people in the cathedral for a service. They put it online, and they're up to 60, 70, 80 people taking part, because people have, it's a new way, a new doorway, as I described, for people to walk through. And so having that blended approach where you want that engagement, you want that sense of being in and amongst other people sharing that experience, fantastic. But let's give people that option. I fully agree. I'm fascinated to, again, the difference between you three guys. So Hayley, you're going to be filming 2 days before you actually release it. John, you're thinking about live streaming, touch wood. V, you're thinking, no way, we're going to film it in September. I love that. Filming it in September. I remember that. So you got giving yourself loads of time. There's different ways of achieving this, is there not,
Yeah, I think because last year it was different. We were to the wire. We literally got our final edit as it went live, because we had to wait for the physical tree to be up the week before to finish off the filming, because we had to do the torchlight procession at the same time, so all of it was virtual. Yeah. But this year, because we're hoping to do it physically, as in the torchlight, we can focus on doing the service a lot earlier. And it'll only be 20 minutes, it'll be a snapshot, but there'll also be an opportunity within that for people to light their candles at home. So we send the packs home as well for them to do that.
And I have to declare an interest here in that St Barnabas Lincolnshire's Light Up Life is the best one I've ever been to, because they have actually flaming torches, like proper medieval, let's burn down the castle flaming torches. Yeah. And they got given this thing. It's literally 1 meter long, and it's dripping wax all over my shoes, and there's this huge flame. And the Lady Mayoress, remember, the Lady Mayoress was in front of me in this big coat with one of these big fur collar things, and I'm like, I'm gonna set fire to the Lady Mayoress. I just know this. So walking around panicking this, but 1,000 people walking through the streets of Lincoln, through the cobbled streets in front of the cathedral with a flaming torch. That literally, there's big buckets of water you have to go into when you get there. It's a real, you feel part of something hugely significant, and everyone's got their own flavors. John, yours I know is again outside in the car park, and yours is that sharing of experience, that people gathering together, and the huge great tree that you usually manage to get up there with all the lights in the world on it, which I think is brilliant. If you're going to do, always with lights, if you're going to do lights, go for it. So I don't know if anyone's from St Luke's and Sheffield is here, but there's is called Festival of Light, and there is an enormous tree that is covered in lights right in the middle car park. 1,100 people normally gathered around it, and lots of other lights are installed. So uplighters, colours, etc. It's literally a festival light that happens at that moment in the service, and it's moving. It means something. Experience. One hospice we worked with many years ago, one of the trustees offered to do the lights, to do the tree, and he turned up the day before with literally a tree you could pick up and carry by yourself and 1 string of B&Q lights, and that was it. And it was the most underwhelming lights experience. If you're going to do something called Lights, remember, Lights of Love, Light Up Life, the light thing has got to be good. You've got to get in there. Can I just move on to the fundraising message? How much of the fundraising message in this year, or maybe what was experienced from last year, how much are we talking about hospice care, remembrance, etc., and how much are we talking about COVID? And Hayley, again, you mentioned you've got Christmas. For those hospices that don't do a bespoke Christmas appeal, how much of the message is about Christmas? So what's the kind of What's the narrative here? So John, what's the kind of flavour for St Andrews this year about,
I mean,
where does this sit?
Yeah, if I could partly mention last year first, if that,
Yeah, of course.
and the reason I say that is because traditionally our mailings were, they were poor. They were real. Essentially, it was, here's a service, and you can buy some cards, and it's £5 per card, and it wasn't. We didn't have stories. It was, that letter was typed essentially, and it went out with a thing that had a card on it, and that was it. Whereas last year, we engaged with you guys, and I'm happy to talk about the financial difference that made.
Oh, go
but
on then.
we totally changed. Well, we were. I'll save it for when we do the finances. But
Yeah.
we totally changed. We had we talked about care. We talked about the cost of care. Why we needed what we did. Of course, we talked about the service, and we had, hate to use the word case study, but with a family story, and it was totally radically different. Hence, I think we got far more money, and we're going to be keeping that going this year. So similar messages again about the, you know, the service will be in there, but instead of £5 price points, we'll have price points based on service need, and steer people that way, and we'll have a family story again, because it made such a radical difference last year. We'd be nuts to throw that out and go back to the old way, because it made such a difference.
I mean, it did. It was a complete change, I know, and obviously that we're delighted, you know, that the money came in this year. Can I just ask you, John, what's your view in terms of the as fundraisers? We know the challenge of income generation this year. For most, not all, but for most hospices, 2021 actually, at the end of the day, wasn't that bad, because we had emergency, appeals and responses, because we had the DOH money coming in. Do you know what? It wasn't the disaster we feared it could be, almost always. However, 21-22 is the year where we're struggling, because that DOH money is not being replaced. So where do you feel light? Where do you feel, how hard, how far do we go on the fundraising ask this year? Because you and I have had that conversation about where we think we pitch this year.
Yeah, I see. I still think, and it's because of that future where, you know, it's not like we're fundraising for charities that can cure a disease, and once that disease is cured, we can all go home. We will always be providing end of life care. People will always die. We will always be needed, as long as the model of people coming in, or even in adapted models about more care in the community. So I think it is completely, you're right, we dodged a bullet because of various, you know, monies with furlough money and hospice money, but that doesn't mean that it'll be the same next year. So I still think we need, as fundraisers, I mean, hard is a pejorative word, but I still think we need to be totally honest about the need for money to come into our organisations to provide those end-of-life experiences for patients, because those are real, and the financial need is real, if not at this month in time, certainly 12 months down the line. So I think it is completely behoven, actually, as a duty to fundraisers to still tell that message as much, you know, hard, say, pick a different word rather than harsh, because it sounds brutal and cold and nasty.
Direct,
but actually, we've just got to be honest, because we still have that need. Patients will still need us, whether that patient is in the hospice or at their home. And if we look back and we taught a 93-year-old guy how to play the ukulele this summer, we couldn't have done that without money. So it is actually morally beholden to ask than actually to put up a moral thing and say, we're okay this year, I don't need your money, and then come back in a year's time to say, oh, by the way, I do need your money.
Yeah. Hayley, what's the view at Eleanor about how we communicate the need, particularly around lights?
We're kind of 50-50. I think last year was the first year we put in our letter that people didn't have to make a donation to make a dedication. whereas previously that was the ask. It was make it a. However,
we had that conversation with you. Remember, I remember that conversation well. And there was a fear, was there not? Being honest, there was a fear about. Hang on a minute. If we say people can do this without giving us any money, whoa, what's going to happen? I
was really nervous and thought, oh my God, we're not going to raise any money from this campaign. And just the reason why we put these out is to raise money, and I think that's it's the hardest thing, isn't it? This is why we put these direct mail packs out.
Yeah. But so what happened?
Everybody made a donation. So I was delighted, and actually we then had more donations come back in with a higher value to them compared to previous years as well.
Yeah.
And in the past, we'd always done a fixed kind of 20, 30, 50 pounds and then another. And last year we really linked it then back to the care and the services that our family who had then had. So it was about a bereavement counselling session. So it was £40 and 19p, about an hour's worth of care on IPW. And that really worked. And actually our average is only £1 less than our bereavement package for an hour's care. So it really resonated with our supporters rather than just giving them fixed amounts.
That
absolutely did work. Yeah.
Do you agree with John that this year is about that honesty and directness needs to continue? Do you feel comfortable with that we've got to be in there saying this is the problem, this is how you can be part of the solution?
Yeah, and I think, again, a bit like John said, our care always continues. We need money all year round, and we don't have a big thermometer, and at the end of it we can go, yay, it starts all over again. So, and it is about, but people like we said earlier, it's about the time of year as well. So linking in with that timing to then some people only donate at this time of year. So. Yeah.
And V, St Barnabas, I think you've been at the front of hospices who've been happy to get out there and talk about the problem and offer solutions and allow people to be part of that. How have you seen the reaction? Have people been annoyed by this? Have people been, frustrated by the fact that you've been out there asking and talking about need more often than you have been before?
No, as much as I thought we might have done a few too many appeals over the last 18 months, it's proven different people are pulled in different ways to whatever proposition we put out there. And Light Up a Life and any of our in memory ones that we do, we've learned from, we've worked with you over the years, but we do this all in-house now, and we have a beautiful case study, which is always something linked to the care. Last year it was a firefighter who'd lost his fiance quite a few years back, but she'd been in the inpatient unit and been at home. Sure. So she had both lots of care. But he'd also been part of the Torchlight procession in a work capacity, so he'd supported as the fire brigade. So I think having that, and we invested with videography so that we've got everything for digital, so that works. But then, and we had a nod to Margaret, who was our campaign girl from the previous year, who was also a long-standing volunteer, because she sadly died last year of COVID. So this year we're going to be speaking to her son, who's done a lot of fundraising for us already. So we've got two stories there, because obviously we cared for his dad, and Margaret talked about that 2 years ago, but now he's going to be talking about his mum and the fact that she got to go home, as she called it, was the hospice, where the girls could look after her. So we found that works really well, and it's always that pull on. It is a pull on the heartstrings, not going to lie, because it's about translating that to how much it costs for hour of care or whatever it is. But our proposition's there's always 3 different price points, but it's different types of care. So we had bereavement because we knew that was a big thing for last year. Inpatient, because we were talking about inpatient care, but also our hospice at home as well. So.
Sure. And 2, I think, really important points there from my perspective. Firstly, is about telling stories. When we come on to creative, and we'll talk about, again, the importance of actually describing hospice care and describing the experience of lights as well, and what it feels like to be then how we show that. But as with an agency client kind of relationships hat on here, you've absolutely identified the whole point of a charity employing someone like us is that we can come in and bring some knowledge and experience from the wider market that maybe it doesn't exist within the team at the moment. Can bring that knowledge and experience in. You've picked that up, you brought it in-house, and now you're doing your own thing. That's how it should be. No agency relationship should ever be permanent and forever. It's always about you've got some knowledge and experience I need. Let's bring that in. Let's develop that. Let's learn that, and then let's pick that up and run with it ourselves. When you've got the resource and capacity and knowledge in house, you can use that. Then you can bring that forward.
Sorry,
go on, sorry, go on, yeah, please.
I've just seen one of the things in the chat. So Megan was asking about how you can capture those that aren't linked to the cause, because obviously when we have these beautiful stories, it resonates with a lot of families because of the care they've probably received. But actually, and it's something we've been trying to do for the last few years, but we haven't quite cracked it yet. So I'm intrigued, if anyone's doing it well, how you engage with a wider audience that haven't got the connection to your hospice, but have suffered a loss, and it's how you bring them into that, you know, part of Light Up Alive. So we're going to be focusing and almost doing a split test for this year, so we can focus on bereavement rather than hospice care, but that'll be solely digital.
So offering the hospice again as this community resource, we are here for you, even if your life hasn't been touched directly by the service. Your first point of access to hospice care could be just being part of the family that understands bereavement and grief. And I think some of the worry sometimes, certainly the conversation I've had, is that, oh, if we open that door, we're going to get 100,000 people suddenly flooding through and wanting to come to the event, etc. But it's not about, it's about managing in particular. And now, because you've got digital as well, that really does provide a solution to that, again, opening that doorway. So Hayley, your solution of having a limited number of people that are really closely connected and affected are part of the hospice family on site. But here's this digital solution that's available for absolutely everybody else. Come and get it. I think that's a really positive model, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just looking at the time here. We're going to try and finish this by, let's say, about 11 o'clock. We've got sort of just over a quarter of an hour left, and then we'll sort of take some questions at the end. Lucy, is there anything on proposition? V's obviously picked up that point there. Is there anything else that you think we should be covering?
No, lots of conversation and shared experience in the chat, so do have a look through it if you haven't yet. Just a really quick point on your thoughts on how do you guys ensure that the Light Up Alive event is as non-denominational as possible?
Okay, good point. Who wants to take that? So do you have, okay, so here's a really good point, and something that we've dealt with. So is Light Up Alive a Christian service is it the Festival of Carols and Readings? Because, you know, I know from working with Worcester Cathedral, it's the Festival of Carols and Readings, it's a Christian service. So is Lights like that, or is Lights, how do we offer that inclusivity?
Ours is, it's led, the service, even though we don't like to call it a celebration, if you like, is we've been using our spiritual team. So they've basically done the script for that. So, and again, they try and make it all encompassing and non-religious, but sometimes when you're doing it in a church, that's really difficult because then it upsets the church as well. So, but most of them have been quite receptive to it over the years. So we tend to do, and it's a journey of grief is what we follow. So start off quite somber and to leave people uplifted at the end. So there's a series of different readings and different music, not necessarily, used to be a lot of carols, but over the years we've morphed that. So it's more uplifting music for people. And
my question, Emma, hi, I can see you there, and we'll come to you in just a second if that's okay. I just want to ask, has there been a negative response to that shift? So has there been a reaction to, oh, where's my service of carols and readings gone?
No, because I think we'll always have at least one carol in, but the readings tend to be more inspirational readings, whether it's depending on what part of the service it's in, is whether it's about grief, loss, or the journey afterwards, and reflecting and pause and looking ahead. And because we've had that for quite a few years, we've only had one in my experience in 10 years where one church basically refused to hold our service.
Okay.
Because it wasn't religious. There was we want to encompass everybody and welcome everybody in, and their clergy said no. So that was the only time in 10 years that we've had that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Emma, hi, morning. Do you want to unmute yourself and say hi?
Morning, yeah. I'm Emma from the fundraising coordinator from Friends of the Wisdom Hospice. Just on that point, I was just going to say that actually, because our area is split into 3 different areas, we actually use different types of venues to kind of cover that. So just we have Rochester Cathedral, so we have a lovely, which is more religious service, but we also use an abbey over on the island. But our other venue is actually within a school. So you can actually come to, just because you live on an island doesn't mean you need to come to the abbey. We have people that come across to Sittingbourne and come to the one at the school because they feel that that's not so religious and what have you. And each service is slightly different. So, you know, it can encompass something for everybody, as it were. And
Rochester Cathedral, I know well, is a magnificent building, isn't it? It's really inspiring. And for those of us who are lucky enough to have a cathedral that we can play with, it's an amazing experience. But I know Ellie Martin from our team, who's has been at Northern Ireland Hospice for many years. Northern Ireland experience is that it's held in a school. The service is held in a massive school hall, and then there's a procession down to the hospice, and there's the lighting of the tree. So it's often tradition, isn't it? It's often, oh, we've always done it this way, and therefore there's the reluctance to move away from that. But almost always, where a change has been made, the new thing becomes the norm incredibly quickly. So, you know, that opportunity to engage and offer more to more people an experience that they feel comfortable with, that they feel reflects them and their family, I think, again, in a very, very short time, that becomes the norm.
And actually doing it in a school and a venue like that, we actually cover and educate more people, because obviously every year there's new people coming into the school, new kids, new parents and what have you, and that as well. And the school we use, actually, unfortunately, we know very well for teachers and obviously parents. So that's good.
Do you know what, Emma? It's a fascinating point you make, and a really, really good one. So immediately my brain's going, okay, so where is a simple information piece, particularly because we've got digital this year, that can go out to every school in our community going, guys, there's an online service for Remembrance Celebration, and you could actually introduce this for your children, for parents or grandparents or loved ones. So here's a way that children, and that does that not open the door to the hospice talking to local schools about, well, let's talk about death and let's talk about bereavement and grief and experience, etc. You've got a thing now. You've got it online. You've got a thing you can offer to every school.
Yeah, and we've actually had because they lost a teacher only last year, the year before. They asked us, and we actually had our bereavement lady go in and actually speak to kids at the school as well. So it's really opened it up.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emma. Right, I just want to move on to media, if that's okay. So just briefly, our experience, certainly throughout the pandemic, was that digital exploded, great experiences, lots more money coming in through digital channels than we've ever seen before. Brilliant. And certainly in all the offline stuff and all the direct mail, for example, that we're producing, we're offering online giving and engagement options, and a percentage of the audience are choosing to go there. And I know that many hospices, particularly with emergency or resilience, recovery appeals, and we delivered many of each, saw the kind of numbers coming in that they would expect for a whole appeal were just arriving digitally. However, what we saw was, when we reviewed, and if you saw the webinar that we delivered at the end of last year, what we saw was, when we actually reviewed the income profile, roughly a third of money overall is coming in digitally. And that third of money is much bigger now because more people are supporting local hospice, but 2/3 is still coming back. 2/3 of money that was raised as appeals last year was raised because an envelope landed in front of them and because they sent something back in a second envelope. Yeah. And so while digital is a much cheaper, easier, more accessible way of doing that, my argument would be, however it's delivered, you've got to make sure that you have that direct mail option, because we think about our audience, the demographic of audience, they're responding to direct mail. Yeah. Again, guys, I'm looking at you three. Is that fair? Is that your experience?
Definitely. Yeah, we wouldn't move away from doing a direct mail. We obviously put on all of our materials, like, please dedicate your online, but we would still send them a postal pack to start with, because that's they're most likely to read. Yeah.
And that, again, that online response. One of the things I wanted to say was just cover online experiences. And V, I know that in terms of the streaming, you had a bad experience, didn't you? Last year. just to flag it up, the fact that this is something to be, we said we wanted to mention this, is something to be thought about, that's all.
Yeah, so Julia's just put it in the chat as well. Yeah, so when we literally went live We had a number of hackers try and divert supporters from our actual Facebook event page to what looked like our donation portal, but luckily we were able to take that down within 5 minutes. But yeah, that's just something to be wary of. It doesn't, even though it wasn't a live stream, it was just, we said it's now happening now. So because people had that opportunity, they could just get in and start spamming. So it's just something to be mindful of, and make sure you're monitoring it as soon as it goes live.
It never occurred to me in a million years that that would happen. Who the hell would spam an online charity fundraising event to try and steal donations? I mean, what kind of world we live in? However, okay, here we are. So really, really important point, guys, in that opening these digital doorways up opens the opportunity for someone to jump in and pretend to be you and grab that donations elsewhere. So you've got to be vigilant about it, yeah? It is going to take time. You need to be watching that. So if you are live streaming, if you are putting that out online, you've got to make sure, and you've got to be monitoring those comments. V, is that fair?
Yeah. Literally, we had the whole of our marketing team were all on it. I was sat at the edge of the cathedral, waiting to light the tree and having to basically just delete the whole event, which was fine. The only other way you could combat that would be to get people to register, and then they got a sign in, but then you're kind of cutting people out that might just stumble across it on the night. And obviously we saw our donations go through the roof overnight, because people were donating because there was a call to action straight away on screen.
Sure, okay. What about other engagements? So John, you talked, for example, about using Facebook, etc. So what did you find last year from your digital engagement? How did people respond to that?
We tried something, we tried VisuFund for the first time, the virtual tree. And that worked really well. So we were directing people there from Facebook. We had the digital, as you said, and just had a wee look down at our numbers to get a rough comparison. Yeah, it was roughly about that. So we had a loads more digital and loads more telephone, people calling in with credit cards, but still 2/3 roughly. Yeah, it was exactly that proportion. 2/3 were going to respond by paper, but it was just having that extra way. So using the Facebook, the local newspaper did a piece on us. So just trying to think and get more creative beyond the mail pack to get there. And yes, and when I've got the time, I'll go back and analyse what came from what. But over the piece, we can't complain.
Hayley, what was Eleanor's experience online last year? Because I know you put quite a lot into that.
Yeah, we did, and then we had on the night that it went live, although it was obviously pre-recorded. We had both channels that we put it out on. We were monitoring every single comment that came in, just to then make sure that obviously we didn't have anything along those lines with hackers. But yeah, we will push more this year. I think it was a learning for us. We didn't go heavy with it last year, but we will do more this year, particularly through Facebook as well.
And John, you mentioned VisuFund. So for those who don't know VisuFund is a separate agency, completely nothing to do with us. Lovely people, and what they do is they provide engagement fundraising solutions online. So there are trees and skies and flowers, etc., and you can make a dedication, leave a comment, leave a thing, etc. Other providers are available. We know VisuFund are lovely, but there are many others providers as well. So did you three guys, V, I know that you had an online portal as well. So what was your online option last year?
We decided to develop our own website because we were working with a new web developer that was able to do it. So we took people on a journey. So when people made their dedication, they then got took to a dedication page where their light shone and their message was there, and they got to see a snippet of the torchlight procession as a part of that, and then they could share that onto their socials. We're going to try and take that a little bit of a step further this year, because that worked for us, because we were already on that journey of developing our website, and then it's worked for doing it for dragonflies, and we've just launched wildflowers, which again is people could go online and they'll see their little petal floating down the screen when they make their dedication and stuff. So it's
So can I ask all three of you, do you feel that does digital add value and add experience to people that are already choosing to engage in traditional methods, or is digital just simply a new doorway for people are engaging solely in digital that aren't engaging, or is there a Venn diagram between the two, and what's the feel of that?
I think it's a bit of both. I think we haven't analysed it completely, but we have got a crossover. So I know those that got the mailing that went online instead, but 1/3 of our income came from online. So we something we will invest in, but we would never let go of the actual mailing itself.
Does John, Hayley, anything to add to that? Does that reflect your experience?
Yeah, that reflects ours as well, that we wouldn't move away from just doing a DM, but we obviously, cross over with the two and they link in nicely together.
Okay.
I think there is a bit of added value, Ash, with, if you think, although of our digital, far more just gave, through Stripe, but 6,000, but I think for them, the ability to upload a picture of the loved one that they're dedicating. So it's that thing, I think V says it's a bit of both. So yes, financially, but it's also for those that want to go and do that and they upload the picture. And, my mum did this about a friend that she lost recently in our catchment area. There's definitely the value that we're adding, as well as just as hard-hitting fundraisers with the money.
Sure. Lucy, just before we move on this, I'm so remiss in not changing my slide. Look at that, I didn't put the media slide up. And Lucy, you worked so hard on it. Any other points that you think we need to cover on sort of talking about Robertson Media? Have we covered everything that people were asking?
Yeah, no, I think you're all good.
I'm just looking at the time, guys. I know some of you may need to zip off for another 11 o'clock Zoom, the joy of living on Zoom these days, that's fine. You can come back and watch the rest of this. We've probably got another 10 minutes or so to go, but you can come back and pick this up on the recording if you wish to. So we're looking for about another 10 minutes, I think. I'd just like to skip on and just look at we talked about timing very briefly, in that the one experience that I can give is that having done 3 years worth of Light Up a Life reviews for Hospice UK back in the early 2000s, the mid noughties, what was clear was that those lights campaigns, those lights events that happened later in December, tended to be the ones that did the best, simply because it gave more space and time for people to choose and engage. And so one of the things where the service is earlier, at the end of November or the beginning of December, it's really important to have a clear deadline in terms of we need your responses back because we want to put a name in a book or a light on a star or whatever it might be. So the timing of that. But Hayley, you are the hospice that's doing Christmas appeal. So for you guys, lights has got to fit together with Christmas, yeah? So where does kind of lights end and Christmas start for you guys, and kind of in your calendar, as it were?
So technically, I guess they overlap. So our lights is due to drop on the 8th of October this year. And then our main service is the 11th of December. So we tend to have lights out for about 9 weeks.
Okay.
I find that gives people enough time to then respond. And obviously we have then the deadline of the Tuesday beforehand for names and everything to make, because we do a presentation of names at the service and online. Yeah. But then our Christmas one then drops mid-November. So we try to make sure that we've got 4.5, 5 weeks between the two, because there will be crossover. People will get both. Not everybody, but some will get both. So it's making sure that then we've got enough time in between.
And some hospices find that terrifying. I know, the fact that you've got lights and Christmas, and we had a Christmas webinar a few weeks ago where we talked about this issue, the fact that you've got lights and Christmas. Some hospices have actually got a raffle in the middle of that as well. And what we talked about there was that flow of communication. If we just chuck stuff out there without any reference to anything else that people are getting, then yeah, we might start annoying people. But if we talk to people sensitively about the journey that they're on, about the relationship we have. So one of the challenges, therefore, is being able to capture lights responses in order to be able to create the right segment for the Christmas appeal that says, hey, you just give delights, you're magnificent, we love you, here's Christmas. Because the propositions are different, yeah? And again, for you, you've got adults and children. Obviously, the Christmas campaign is more focused on the children, but not exclusively. But it's about lights as a service you're providing. A lot of people are quite comfortable, in my experience, of donating to lights. John, when you used to ask for the £5 for the card, because it's literally, we're doing something and there's a cost to it and we're asking you to pay. For it's almost like a ticket of entry, really. And we've talked about using the proposition, how we encourage people to think about the costs of care to improve average gifts. But the Christmas campaign is different. It's an altruistic gift. It's a donation to improve the lives of others that come after me. And it's not about remembrance of my loved one at all. So many people, Hayley, I think you're right. I don't know what your experience is, but again, that Venn diagram, there are people who will do both because there's different mindsets behind them.
Yeah, we tried a Christmas campaign and it just doesn't seem to work for us, but maybe it's all about our time is in over the next few years, things might change. Yeah. But obviously last year was a slight anomaly. Usually our lights would go out probably very end of September, early October. But what we found actually went out 1st of November and that didn't make an impact on the income in terms of it doubled our income, because I think people were in that mindset of thinking about heading towards Christmas, missing their loved ones. So it worked, but also we just had another in memory campaign finish the end of September, so we had to give a little bit of a saving grace between.
You like your in memory campaigns, don't you? I mean, it's interesting.
Well, it wouldn't have normally gone on for that long, but because of COVID, Dragonfly went from March through to September because we had to postpone the display. But it worked in our favour because we made the income.
And those are, John, I know obviously as you talked about, you got Thanksgiving thistles happening this summer, and everyone in England is just dead jealous because we can't have Thanksgiving thistles and you can. But again, it's going to be really interesting to see, right, how does that work? So what those opportunities for a different way of celebrating, remembering, and giving that tangible option, how that will affect that.
It's early days yet, Ash. We're what's it been out 2.5 weeks? We've got 15,000 in so far, so we're quite pleased with that. It's early days, but then so was our Light Up Life when we first did it. I mean, you know, our first Light Up Life I think was something like 30,000. Whereas it's totally different now. So yeah, we're hopeful.
Okay. Lastly, guys, I just want to touch on creative, and it's the last thing that we come to. So our focus is, for those of you that work with us or talk to us, we focus on the visuals and the creative last. The tone of voice is really important. But for lights, I'd actually like just to focus on imagery, if that's okay. We can talk about, again, family stories, John, as you've so eloquently explained about, you know, the power of those, and how we talk about the story that you're going to be telling this year is amazing, and it's that follow on from last year, that journey that family is going through. And again, you being honest, direct, open about how we describe hospice care and lights. There's always been a problem. Certainly in 15 years we've delivered lights campaigns now for a number of hospices. We're well over 100 lights campaigns that we've delivered. The image, the thing, the way that you describe that is often the challenge. And when I first arrived 15 years ago, my first lights, basically there were 3 Shutterstock images. There was one of a candle being held in cupped hands in a black background, and then there was some candles making out a heart in a black background, and then there was like this weird tree thing, and it was all black and dark. And one of the things that we've done over the years, you can see, you know, on screen here, is trying to, lights have to shine out from a background. We get that, but you don't have to go black and dark. It's about how do we show that. And I'm just going to show you my favorite image, and this is from St Francis in Berkhamsted. This is 10 years old now, which makes me feel very old because I remember it very clearly. So I've literally just taken a photograph of that on my desk. There you go. So I took it off the wall. I've got loads of them behind me. That's my favorite lights image ever, because it's a real image. The dad took that of his daughter as she's hanging the glow stick on the tree, and it's just perfect. There's the lights in the background, so there's that symbolism of what's happening here. That little girl is about to hang the glow stick on the tree in memory of her nan, as it turned out. I've yet to find an image that comes anywhere near, and we can't use that image again. We've worked with St Francis since. We can't use that image because it's you know, we don't have permission for it, and that family's not around anymore. But that just is the best image that I've ever discovered, in my personal view, about lights. That's what I'm hoping to achieve. And when we talk about creative, you know, so hey, there you go. Again, so Eleanor's branding is the orange is very strong, Eleanor's brand. So again, that's by bringing in the color palette and using those. But the one thing I wanted to talk about was imagery. It was really interesting. You said that part of your digital engagement was actually people are almost taking a virtual part. There's a GoPro or whatever walking along through in the procession. That experience of being part of lights and showing what that looks and feels like, I think, is hugely important. Yeah, and I love the fact that you've got that engagement. But the one challenge we have as an agency working with hospices, we turn up and say, right, what images have you got? And quite a lot of the time, we haven't really got anything. So the one plea I would have as a creative agency to all of you is that if you haven't got photographic imagery of lights, big stuff taken from high up, showing lots and lots of people coming together with lights, close-ups like that image of that little girl, please take some this year, because you will benefit so much in future years from actually being able to show. And we recognize the challenges of privacy, etc., but you can take things from the back, you can take things in close-up just with hands and that kind of stuff. So what's your experience like? So how easy and how difficult, how challenging is it to get those experiences, those images?
We find consent on. So we struggle with the consent side of things. But as you say, yeah, we try and take some photos, but it's really difficult because it's such an emotional thing when you're actually at the event itself.
Yeah.
It's finding the right time to actually ask. But our in-house designer created the tree for us last year. Yeah. So we're following through with the similar branding for this year.
V, I wonder whether, you know, you're staging a lights in September. Is there value maybe to thinking about how do we create some visual assets early?
We do that anyway. We do, yeah, for the last few years, actually, we've always mocked up, because of the torchlight, we have some imagery where it's people holding a photo of their loved one, but they're mocked up whether they've got a woolly hat on, and it's obviously a dark background, so you can put them out. Yeah. But also we do, for the last, 5 years, we have invested in our photography. So quite fortunate that a lot of local photographers will come and take pictures of the torchlight procession. So we've got a plethora of different ones to use. Yeah. Some that are close up, and but then we always advertise that actually we are taking photographs. So if you don't wish to be in a photo, then let us know. But yeah, we just utilise what we've got. But yeah, mocking them up, we've done that for a number of years, because depending on who was the focus, if you like, as in who was our spokesperson, if we wanted them in it, then we do that. So with Margaret, she'd even gone out and bought a coat, bless her, to wear for hers. So yeah, so it'll be, we're not quite sure what we're going to do creatively, because I'd like to start using some of because we've got some beautiful imagery of people hanging their messages on the tree and stuff like that. So we need to start using them probably a little bit more.
I think it's the kids stuff that works so well. I think again, I remember at St Luke's in Sheffield a few years ago, they started having little candle bags that they would offer to the kids. So the candle bags, obviously, you know, sort of coated inside, cut with different holes in, etc., and a candle. And I think they asked for £5, but they had a trestle table with a load of crayons. So the kids, while they're waiting half an hour for the lights to go in, they would actually then spend some time colouring in, etc. And then those candle bags with the candle lit we put under the tree. And again, it's those images of the candle bags, those images of young hands, you know, sort of writing Nan's name or something. You can get round, Hayley, I think, some of those challenges of privacy and individuality by thinking about what are those moments, those experiences, yeah, that you do that. John, you've got a fantastic opportunity because you've got so many people gathered in such, you have the luxury of such a large space outside the hospice. You can show a lot of people together, can't you?
We can, but I think probably the best phrase is we're on a learning journey, Ash, because our tree in the past, you know, because in the past we did this just kind of type sheet with a bit of text saying here's a card for £5 and come to a service. We didn't, you know, and we were also fortunate because the money was great, so we didn't have to invest. So it's with that hindsight that we've radically changed. Yeah. So I'm now sort of mentally thinking of all those opportunities to capture. We're guilty. We haven't done that in the past, but we now need to do that.
But there's no shame in that. Again, John, you're in a situation where you've not needed to do that before, and so I'm just not in that position before. But there's you, a very, very established hospice that's still going, oh, okay, actually, here's where we move forward. You know, I think the purpose of sessions like this, and also you as a trustee of Hospice Income Generation Network, that's the purpose of the network. That there is this knowledge and experience out there that can be shared, and almost everyone in the movement, I think, is happy to share, you know, positive stories and experiences that allows other hospices to step up and go, okay, we don't have to go through that learning process because we can literally adopt the learning that's been applied, and certainly that's been our experience of working with you there. Lucy, I'm just aware of the time. Is there any further questions that we wish to cover? Happy? No. Is everyone good? Okay. Guys, I hope that's been useful for you. I'm just going to stop. Just going to quickly click through to say on our website there is 15-16 months worth of webinars covering a wide variety of topics, much to do with hospices. Please do help yourself. If you're struggling to sleep, you can go and get one of those and put those on by your bedside. And obviously we are here, so we're fortunate to work with Veronica and Hayley and John, and we love them all deeply. We are here to support hospices as they need to be supported, as Hayley said. So Hayley, you're a good example because you have an in-house designer that does your design work. You don't need design, so we don't give you design. You've got that, but what we provide is a resource for the copy and proposition development that experience doesn't exist. So we're here to bring the knowledge and experience that we have and impart that and deliver that for hospices that need it. And we can help with all this stuff. So we can deliver lights from start to finish, or we can just do the copy, or we can just do the creative, or we can just advise, etc. So here are all our contact details. The website's there. Just drop us a line at hello@pebblebeachfundraising.com. There's no cost, there's no obligation. Come and have a chat to us. Come and pitch us an idea. Tell us what you're thinking. Ask us a question. We'll be happy to give you that response. Finally, can I just say thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. I hope you found that was useful. John and V, I'm going to put your heads in the box saying I know that you guys will be happy for anyone to contact Hospice Income Generation Network. Anyone watching here, if you're not a member, go and join.
It's free.
It's free. Go and join. There's the national network of hospice fundraisers there for you, with online resource available to you as well. So please go and join that. And hopefully we'll see you at the conference next March as well. Anyone wants to ask us any questions, please do get in touch. And again, if you want to share this webinar, then it'll be up on our website later today and on YouTube as well. Lastly, thank you so much to Veronica, Hayley and John for joining us and giving us some of their time. I know how busy these three guys are. Everyone else, have a fantastic summer. Enjoy the weather. Stay safe. Have a fantastic lights. And we'll look forward to speaking to you very soon. Okay. All the very best now. Take care.